eat his flesh and drink his blood. Now, I want us to look up in verse 56, and there's an important word that we see there. Miss Davis, would you read 56 for us, please?
He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood abides in me, and I in him.
Okay. The word that's important is abides. And what's interesting now, if I eat something, it now abides in me. But I'm not really abiding in it. But in some ways I am. Because why? What I eat gives me nourishment, and that is life. So I'm abiding, living, because of what I ingest. Jesus again says that this is abiding in him. And with that, I'm going to do a little bit of math here, if I can get this thing working correctly here. We all know me and my lap pads. Catch that one, Miss Davis? Am I right there? Okay, good. Look, and we're going to turn now, because I want us to understand something. He says, again in verse 56, eating his flesh and drinking blood. Okay, this would be a shock. I'm telling you, these poor guys. Drinking blood equals what? Abiding. Okay, abiding. Now, it's abiding in him and him in us. Now, turn to 1 John, please. And Miss Davis, read 1 John chapter 3, verse 24.
And the one who keeps his commandments abides in him, and he in him. We know by this that he abides in us by the Spirit whom he has given us.
Okay, there's a lot there. But what he says there is the one who keeps, and we know the keeping is not obeying. The keeping there is the Greek tereo, and which we've talked about so often, but it means meditation, thinking on them, making them the life that you are. And he says, he who keeps, and he says that he keeps the commandments, does what? Abides. And what's interesting, look at verse 24, and we're going to see something. The one who keeps his commandments abides in him, and he in him. Do you see that what we looked at in verse 63 above, or back in John, in verse 56, he who eats my flesh and drinks my blood abides in me, and I in him. And now we have John saying, the one who keeps his commandments abides in him, and he in him. So we're seeing something that's very parallel here. But I think the thing that I want us to look at, and here's where your math skills come in, the word abides and abides, I could change this to abides, is the same. Okay, so we know that abides equals abides. Okay? This is for the slow group. Abides equals abides here. Yeah. Oh, wow. Can't take that. But now, why do I bring that up? Because he has said, eating flesh and drinking blood as abides. And if I say, well, okay, abides is also keeps, it's not too difficult to go keeping. Keep the commandments. And when you do that, what do you wind up with is abiding is keeping the commandments. Well, what would eating the flesh and drinking the blood be? They're all the same. That's abiding. And I don't think that that's said accidentally by any means. I don't think that when he says in and in, abiding in him and him in me, that this is not shouldn't be a surprise to us, but I think it's also very specifically said in a way for us to really get that. Now, the reason that I say that is because of verses we've talked about already, and those are in John chapter 1. We talked about that, right? I'm the Word. Did we talk about that? No?
No.
Okay. Well, we will. We've got to talk about a few other things first. So right now, I want to explain again some other things just on the concepts we're talking about here. We'll come back to that. But we see in verse 63 in John, turn back to John again, please, okay? And this is interesting. In verse 63, he says, it's the Spirit who gives life. Now, okay, the Spirit gives life, but Jesus has just said, well, you have to eat my flesh and drink my blood. Otherwise, now look what he says. Look at verse 53. This is really so cool. I say to you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, look how he says it. You have no life in yourselves. What does the flesh, when it's in covenant with God, what is it filled with? His Spirit, which as we look in 1 John, or rather, verse 63 in John, I'm sorry. It's the Spirit who gives what? Life. He didn't say the flesh gives life. He said, if you eat my flesh, in other words, you got my flesh inside you, now you have the place that the Spirit of God can be. Okay? If you don't have my flesh in you, though, you can't have the life in you either. He didn't say that drinking the blood, eating the flesh brought the life. It's that if you don't do it, you don't have life in you. What's the life? What did he say? Look in verse 63. It's the Spirit who gives life. Now, you can think of it, draw it out. Here's me, and I don't have a good receptacle for God anymore. Well, I get a new lining. That is the flesh, the sarx of Jesus Christ. All right? And now I have that living in me, but Yeshua, or rather John comes up, as we have seen in 1 John, and Yeshua says it too in chapter 14 of John, that abiding in him is abiding in the Word. Do you understand what I'm saying? So we see that in verse 63 there in John 6, that his words are spirit and life. Remember him saying that? My words are spirit and life. And now I want you just for a moment to stop and think about something. We're going to go and take a look at this later on, but there's some other verses we need to look at first. But my words are spirit and life. In the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God. Okay? God was the Word. I mean, the Word became what? Flesh. Are you kind of catching now why it's not too difficult to say that these two equal each other? The Word became flesh. When I am, and this is something when you are meditating on the Word of God, you are literally ingesting the sarx of Jesus Christ. It's the place for you to receive the Spirit. If you eat something, well, let's go with me and see what really gets me. Broccoli. When I was a kid, I loved broccoli, man. But I got older, and it wasn't that I quit loving broccoli. Broccoli quit loving me. I can try to eat it now, and I'm going to be pretty ill. I don't know why, but when you eat something that you shouldn't have, you ingest it. Why? Your body can't handle whatever that was. We have been given the very flesh of Jesus Christ through the Word. Now, I want you to think about it. If your flesh is of the world, your flesh is of the world. When the Spirit tries to come in there, you're going to have a gastric disagreement, if you know what I'm saying. Because my thoughts are about the world, and the Word comes in, and there's going to be a clashing, okay? Because the Word, take the I out of there, and I know it's not, but the Word has become flesh. And the more of the Word that we put into our lives, the more of the flesh of Jesus Christ we have in us, and are more capable of receiving more of the Spirit. Now, I'm not reaching far to get this. I mean, this makes all the sense in the world when you start thinking about it in these terms. Now, I want to, with that, open your Bibles to Leviticus, please. Leviticus 17. Ms. Davis, read 11 through 14, please.
For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I've given it to you on the altar to make atonement for your souls, for it is the blood by reason of the life that makes atonement. Therefore I said to the sons of Israel, no person among you may eat blood, nor may any alien who sojourns among you eat blood. So when any man from the sons of Israel or from the aliens who sojourn among you in hunting catches a beast or a bird which may be eaten, he shall pour out its blood and cover it with earth. For as for the life of all flesh, its blood is identified with its life. Therefore I said to the sons of Israel, you are not to eat the blood of any flesh, for the life of all flesh is its blood. Whoever eats it shall be cut off.
Now, look at the first part of verse 14. For the life of all flesh, its blood is identified with its life. Now, does that sound like anything we've been talking about? The glory, the recognition, the identified. What he's saying is you can recognize whatever the beast is by the blood, because the blood is different in it. And that blood is now, when God says that life, the life of all flesh, its blood is identified with its life, what he's saying to us there, and then later on with Yeshua, is how are you identified? With the blood of the Son of God's flesh, the Son of Man, or of the life of the world? Now I want us to read again. I just want us to hear these things. Deuteronomy chapter 12. Uh, 21 through 25, it states. Deuteronomy 12:20. Deuteronomy is in the early part of the Bible there.
21 through 25.
Uh-huh.
If the place which the Lord your God chooses to put his name is too far from you, then you may slaughter of your herd and flock which the Lord has given you, as I have commanded you, and you may eat within your gates whatever you desire. Just as a gazelle or a deer is eaten, so you shall eat it. The unclean and the clean alike may eat it. Only be sure not to eat the blood, for the blood is the life, and you shall not eat the life with the flesh. You shall not eat it. You shall pour it out on the ground like water. You shall not eat it, in order that it may be well with you and your sons after you, for you will be doing what is right in the sight of the Lord.
Okay. We've we've already talked about this, but I want you to turn to John chapter 1. And I want to run through some other things, and we're talking about this. John chapter 1, please. And Miss Davis, will you read? Well, I'll read it because I need to stop in a particular place. John 1, verse 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. The Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him. And apart from him, nothing has come into being that has come into being. This is stunning when I'm talking, but it's something different. The Word, and it's for us to wrap our minds around this is very difficult, but it's like the Spirit is here, but in that communication, commune, okay, the communication, the common of that we hear and understand, even everything was made through that Word, and all things we know that came into being because of that Word. He was in the beginning with God before anything was actually created. But this Word, that if we were to think of our actual communication having life in itself, and now we're getting a little ethereal and weird, but that's okay. We need to understand that Yeshua was this Word. Or maybe is that Word. Okay, it uses the word was because but he is the Word. John 1:14, please. And that Word, I know it says the Word, but that Word that we're just talking about right there was this amazing miracle. That Word, the Word, became Sarx. That Word lowered itself to a point and emptied of all things and became literally just like you and me. That's important. He became that's why he became flesh. Remember, all things came to be through him, and apart from him, nothing came into being. And it goes on, and in other places it says everything holds together because of that. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And we saw his recognition. We identified him. We saw his glory. The glory, remember it talking about the blood is the identification. The life is the identification of the different types of flesh. And basically he's saying, we saw him. We identified him. We understand that what we were looking at is the Word, and the Word became like you, and the Word became like me. And when we saw his glory of the only begotten from the Father, full of grace and truth. Now, I want to kind of back up in some ways, and I want to look, open up your Bibles at some verses. It's amazing how this all happens very quickly. Open up to Genesis, please. And this is only, well, how can I say this? This is only so that you can kind of understand what God was doing. Because in the new covenant, here stands their leader, here stands the one that they go, well, we found the Messiah. It's him. I'm telling you, it's him. Nobody can do these things except him. And what does he do? You need to eat of my flesh and drink my blood. Did he just say that? Yes. And we're going to stick with him now. I mean, ooh, boy, everything's so strange. But I want us to look at, I think, one of the strangest things that we see in the covenants that God cut with man. The covenant of creation, Genesis chapter 1. Please look in verse 29. In 28, he blesses everybody. He says, be fruitful, multiply. He's talking about man, rule the earth, rule over the fish, the birds, all that stuff. 29, I have given you every plant yielding seed on the surface of all the earth, and every tree which has fruit yielding seed, it shall be food to you, and to every beast of the earth, to every bird of the sky, to everything that moves on the earth which has life. I have given every green plant for food, and it was so. Okay? So we've got right there, in the midst of the opening covenant where God is saying, mankind, here's the way you're supposed to act, here's what's going to happen. And in his provision, we know those things happen in blood covenant. And he's saying, I'm giving you, here's the dietary law. You can eat of every green plant. And then we look in chapter 2 and see something that is a little different. Verse 15, or 8. The Lord God planted a garden toward the east in Eden, and he placed the man who he had formed. And out of the ground the Lord caused to grow every tree that is pleasing in the sight, good for food, the tree of life also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. We go to verse 16. Yahweh God commanded the man, saying, from any tree of the garden you may eat freely, but from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day you eat of it you surely die. And there is a bit of a change in the dietary laws. What did we see at first? We're seeing the covenant of creation, and in that covenant of creation, he goes everything, but then he comes along and he says, except. There's been a little bit of a change, but it's about to happen even more so. We go to chapter 3, and guess what Satan is coming after him with? Interestingly, dietary. Indeed, has God said, you shall not eat from any tree of the garden. And of course, Eve answers her answer, and Satan gets Adam or Eve to eat, and she gets him to eat, and then they're using fig leaves instead of eating them, they're trying to clothe themselves in them. And if we go on down to verse 17, then to Adam he said, because you've listened to the voice of your wife, have eaten from the tree about which I commanded you, you shall not eat from it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In toil you will eat of it. Interesting, he's already talking about something different in everything has been given to him before. Everything. It's all given to you, except for one thing. But everything's been given to you. Now what's going to happen? The way that you eat has even changed. The way that you eat, it's only when you toil all the days of your life. Both thorns and thistles it shall grow for you. Wonderful. You shall eat the plants of the fields by the sweat of your face. You will eat bread till you return to the ground, because from it you were taken. From dust to dust you shall return. And we see again a change in the dietary law. Now, let's turn to Genesis 8. Is that right? Around in there somewhere? Um, 8, it's in 9? Yeah. Genesis 9, after the flood, and he says, verse 2, the fear and terror of you will be on every beast of the earth. This is really something that's amazing that happened. Suddenly, all the animals are afraid of us because we can eat them now, if we look. Everything that creeps on the ground, all the fish of the sea, into your hand they're given. Every moving thing is alive shall be food for you. I give it all to you, as I gave the green plant. Only you shall not eat the flesh with its life, that's its blood. Surely I will require your lifeblood from every beast, I will require it. From every man's brother, I will require the life of the man. And it was at this point that, again, what do we see? A change in dietary laws. Now, what all this means, I don't for even begin to say, oh, I can tell you why. Here's what happened. But I think one of the reasons that the changes in the dietary laws that we see in these covenants, and if we were to go on to the Mosaic covenant, what do we find out? Well, there's these unclean animals that I don't want you to eat. Oh, another change in dietary laws. This is, it's just enough to make you go, what? Why? But now we get to the new covenant. And of the 7 major covenants, and of course there's a lot of others, but of the 7 major covenants, we've already seen that, 4 of those had dietary law changes. The Davidic covenant kind of segues into the new covenant in a very strong way. And you could even, I guess, easily say the Davidic covenant had a dietary law change because what? Jesus comes up and these Jews are standing there and he says, dietary law change. Now, if they're paying attention to the other ones, they're going to be going, something's different happening here. But I can tell you, most people are not catching it. Something has changed. And it's changed because why would God say, I don't want you drinking of the blood? He's going to be making a point later on. And that point is that you don't get your life, you do not get your life from blood. You don't get it, and of course the heathen would drink the blood. They would drink the blood believing what? They were getting the life and essence of that person. The Native Americans, when they killed one of their enemies, one of the reasons for the scalping that they did was that they believed that that hair that person that they pulled off and the skin and everything, that put that life to the person that killed them. They had that extra life in them. They were brave, and now they're even braver. But they also, we know, would kill an enemy, and they may drink of that person's blood. That because of the belief, I'm receiving that life. When they would kill an animal, they would often, while it was still fresh, eat of part of it raw and be drinking the blood, believing, as do many, many, many people, I'm receiving that life, the very essence of that person. The shock was he's saying, you need to be drinking my blood. For a Jew, they're going, but they also would have understood the picture, which we don't because we don't understand blood covenant, or the Bible, which over and over says, what? The life is in the blood. this change in the dietary law. Now, I only bring it up because of the sarx of Jesus Christ, we're supposed to be receiving his flesh, receiving his sarx, receiving his blood, receiving his life. And as such, we don't live in the way we used to live. There's a new covenant. There's a new life in me that was not the way the old life was. My old life was crucified with him. When he died, I died. And when he rose again, so did I. And when I receive and keep his commandments, as we've already looked at, the keeping of his commandments is abiding in him and he in us. We've got a new commandment that we love as he loved. Well, you can't do that unless what? You have him inside you doing the loving.